I've been looking at the latest UK earnings data and I was really surprised with what I found. I can see how much the average person earns all the way up to the top 1% and everything in between. So first, let's talk averages. Looking at the latest data from the Office for National Statistics, out of the 30 million or so people on payroll in the UK, we get a figure that says average weekly total earnings for all workers comes to £716. Now, if we turn this into an annual figure by multiplying it by 52 weeks in a year, we get £37,232. Now, this doesn't tell us the whole story, and there's a lot of detail left to cover before we move up to looking at the top 10% in the UK. This is because we first got to explain how this number is calculated. Just before that, take a guess what you think the top 10% earn and either pop it in the comments or at least hold it in your mind. I'd love to know how many of you guess it right. Anyway, this amount is actually the mean average, and if you paid attention back in school, you'd know that there are two ways to calculate an average. You have your mean average and the median average. To explain things, let me change the camera angle up and go and get some props. Okay, so back to averages. These 10 tomatoes are going to represent 10% of the population each, and from left to right, we'll have the lowest earners moving all the way up to the top 10%. So, as I just said, there are two ways to measure the average, the median average and the mean average. The mean average is the one that I think most of us will understand. Now, to calculate this, you would add up the earnings of all the workers in total and then just divide it by the total number of workers. Sounds simple enough. But there is a big flaw to this which I can show you right now. Let's say that each tomato is just one person to keep things simple now. Everyone earns £10,000 a year, apart from this little tomato here who earns £100,000. So 9 people earn £10,000 and one lucky guy earns 10 times more. Now, if you use the mean average to calculate our average earner here, we do the following calculation. We'd add up 9 lots of £10,000 with one lot of £100,000 and get a total of £190,000. We then divide this number by the total number of people, which means we need to do 190,000 divided by 10, giving us a mean average of £19,000. Now, in this example, do you think the mean average is a good reflection of what the average person earns? Well, no, obviously not. You've got one high earner skewing all the figures, so a better way to do this would be to use the median average. The median average is calculated by finding the number that is literally in the middle, and this means that you want the same number of people earning above you as there are below you. In this example, the median average would need to be a line here between the tomatoes. Now, we've got 5 tomatoes to the right of us and 5 tomatoes to the left of us, giving us the median average. What this means is that the median average here would actually be £10,000, which is a much better representation of these 10 working tomatoes. It's not perfect though, as it does ignore the high earner, but it doesn't skew the figures so much that we ignore what most people earn. Right, back to the data for the UK. That first number we looked at is the mean average for all workers, and this doesn't take into account whether the person is full-time or part-time. If we want just a number for full-time workers, we need a little bit of estimating. Now, the latest figures we have for full-time workers goes back to April 2024, and it says that the median average was £37,861. However, we're almost now 12 months on from this, and wages have gone up on average on top of the usual inflation that we'd expect to see. Now, according to the ONS, salaries have increased by 5.6% for the year. So if we take this, then add that amount to £37,861, we then get an estimated number for full-time workers being £39,981 as of April 2025. So this means that if you want to be above the median average for a UK full-time worker, you'll want to be earning £40,000 and above. If you are that person, you can pat yourself on the back. However, what about if you want to join the elite club and try and join the top 25%, top 10%, and even the top 1% of the UK? Let's take a look at the data and go back to using those tomatoes again. If you want to be in the top 25% of earners in the UK, meaning I need to actually cut one of these tomatoes in half, you'll need to earn more than £50,636. I've actually just estimated this figure by adding the annual average wage increase for 2 years worth of data, as the last update we have on this survey only takes us to the end of 2023. It is possible that this amount is below what you need, as the data does include all workers and not just full-time. However, the higher the earners, the much less people you'll have working part-time. So in theory, the data should not get skewed as much as it does on the lower end. Now, moving up the scale to the top 10%, here's where we start to really get into the bigger numbers. For 2025, as of making this video, I estimate that to be in the top 10% of UK earners, you'll need an income of £76,307. This includes about 3 million people in the UK, so that's a big amount to all fit inside this single little tomato here. Now, I already know what you want to see next. What about the rest, and what about the top 5% and even the top 1%? Here's where I do sadly have to cut up our poor little tomato and try to shave off something close to 5%, which is pretty simple as we just need to cut it in half. Now, for the top 5% of earners in the UK, I estimate that you'll need to be looking at a payslip for the year of £106,571. Congratulations, you're now in the six-figure club if you do get here, but unfortunately, as a quick side note, this is actually a salary that makes you fall into a 60% tax trap as you start to lose your tax-free allowance. It's worth looking into this if you didn't already know this, as there's some good ways that you can reduce your income by using things like pension contributions. Now, if you already know my channel, you know I love a bit of tax-efficient investing, and I've made lots of videos on this topic. You can check out my channel a bit later. Now, drum roll please, what about the top 1%? This means cutting up 10% of this little tomato to represent about 300,000 or so UK workers. We're talking top professionals, managers, executives, and even some MPs who love a good second job or two. I estimate that this year, in 2025, you need to earn around £236,694 to join the exclusive 1% club. I wonder how many of you would have guessed that right. I have a feeling that a lot of people would have thought that you need to earn a lot more to be in the top 1%, but it's always interesting to finally find out. Just for fun, if you want to work out a rough take-home pay on this amount, you're looking at a monthly income of £11,435 after tax and national insurance. Each month you'll be paying over £8,000 of income tax and national insurance, and over the year you take home just over £137,000, which is 58% of the total amount. Now, as a quick side note, there is no way to properly know for sure the exact amount you need to get into these brackets, as it will only include people paying income tax into the PAYE system. If you're a company director paying yourself in dividends, or super rich and living from capital gains, you technically can get away with not paying any income taxes, yet still have a very high income. This is a very common way for company directors to pay themselves. They'll take a salary which might only be at the income tax threshold of £12,570, pay no income tax on this, but then pay the rest of their income using dividends. Remember that dividends are taxed at different levels to income tax and have already been hit with corporation tax, as they can only be taken from profits in a business. Now, according to the latest data, there are 2 million active limited companies in the UK. And if we look at the tax income from the latest figures on dividends tax, we can see that last year, £40 billion was collected from dividends and savings interest. It is a category that makes up about 4% of the total UK income, and it's only a fraction of what's brought in from income tax and national insurance. So anyway, it might skew the figures if we could really find out who was earning the most money and we included dividends, but I still think we get a really good idea with the data we have, as most people earn their money through their payslips. Right, let's dive a bit deeper into this data, as I think there are so many things we should still talk about here. If you're wondering what kinds of jobs pay these higher figures, here's the types of jobs that you'll want to focus on. The top paying sectors are all going to be based around management and certain professionals in specialist fields. For example, you've got jobs like IT managers, pharmacists, electrical engineers, and even chief executives. On the lower end of the pay scale, the jobs are typically in entry-level positions and manual labour. You've got work like waiters and waitresses, delivery drivers, and bar staff. Now, one thing to mention here too is that the age of the person is an important factor in all of this. Most of the work on the lower end is done overwhelmingly by younger people. The ONS published some interesting data on this in their report on low and high pay here in the UK. You can see here that 36.1% of people in the 16 to 21 category are classed as low paid workers, whereas the largest groups with middle and high earners are between 35 to 54. It's not really too much of a surprise when you think about it that people earn more as they gain a lot more experience in their professions over the years. Younger people will tend to do the lower paid work first and then move on to other careers later in life. I think it's very easy to think that you're falling behind or not earning enough when compared to other people, but the reality is that salaries don't really peak until much later on in life for the vast majority of people. Now, this brings me on to the final point I wanted to make in this video. None of this income data will make any sense unless you really start to dig into it a bit more. Having a high income and making lots of money does not mean that a person is better off or has a better quality of life. For example, if you look a bit more into the average earnings of people around the country, you'll obviously see that London and the South East have some of the highest earning individuals. London boroughs include the City of London and Tower Hamlets, where the median average gross weekly salary goes up to £1,243 a week. This translates into an annual median salary of more than £64,000. This contrasts massively if you zoom out and look elsewhere in places like the North West. In places just north of Manchester, you can see here that places like Pendle and Burnley are on the lowest part of this scale, where gross weekly median incomes are as low as £575. This then translates to an annual salary of £29,900, which is less than half of what we just saw down in London. However, as I just said, incomes are only one piece of the puzzle, and a high income on its own doesn't really tell us much unless we dig one step deeper. The biggest factor that is far more important, at least when it comes to building wealth, is how much people are able to save and put away. This part can only be determined by how much people spend compared to how much they make. In other words, if the high earners blow all of their income on expensive cars and a pricey rental flat and then leave nothing left for their pensions and savings, a much lower earner could even be better off. As a quick comparison, let's just compare the cost to rent a 2-bedroom flat between London and Burnley just to see how easily a high income can get eaten up. According to the latest data from the ONS, in Tower Hamlets in London, the cost to rent a 2-bedroom flat is £2,322 a month. Now, for our median average earner making £64,000, once you factor in taxes, their take-home pay each month will come to around £3,972 per month. If we say that they're renting this 2-bedroom flat themselves, this means that they're using more than 50% of their income to pay their rent before they have to worry about any other costs. Now, compare this to the median salaried worker in Burnley. This person is taking home £2,087 per month, and they have an average rental cost for a 2-bedroom flat of £551. This amount is just over 25% of their income, so their living costs are half as much as the person who's living and working in London when you look at it as a percentage. Now, obviously, this is just one factor, and these numbers are averages, but I did just want to make the point that income on its own can't tell the whole story. And it's really important to consider other things. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from commuting into London and living quite far out and having much lower costs, for example. Anyway, let me leave you with an interesting article I've read recently. HSBC asked people what salary they needed to be considered rich. The answer, as you can see, was a whopping £213,000. Now, going back to the stats from the beginning, if you did earn this amount of money, you'd be somewhere between the top 2% and the top 1% of all earners in the UK. What's funny in this survey is that they see a huge disconnect between what people think wealth is and what it actually is. Objectively, you can make the argument that anyone in the top 10% of the country could be considered wealthy, yet only 1% of the population self-identifies as wealthy. Now, funny enough, the richer people also put a higher target income that they would need to consider themselves wealthy, and they said that they'd need more than £700,000 before they'd feel it. Another interesting thing here is that the regional difference too, which we touched on earlier. In the North East, they said that an income of £80,000 would put them into the wealthy category, whereas in London, that amount skyrockets to £289,000. They also found something quite interesting too about what people view as signs of wealth. While most people agree that things like a private jet and a yacht are signs of wealth, when high earners are asked about what things they look for, the responses are actually a little bit different. Things like being able to retire early, having multiple holidays abroad, and even being able to own investments are some of the most popular responses. It's funny, isn't it, how even those people who are well into the top 10% of the UK earners can still not consider themselves wealthy, and they still think people around them are doing better, and they need to earn more and more money to finally feel well off. Now, let me know in the comments if you think any of these figures were a lot more or less than you expected. It will be great to see what you all guessed. Anyway, if you want to start building real wealth and actually invest your income rather than spend it all, you're in the right channel. I've just put together a super useful beginner's guide on how to start investing, and alongside this, here's a really useful guide on how to use one of the most important investing accounts in the UK, the Stocks and Shares ISA. I'll see you in the next video. Happy investing.